Hey there, and today I'd like to talk about the fountain pen revolution Jaipur V2. And like I said before, I'm going to the army. In fact, I'm going to the army tomorrow. So it's gonna be another 3 weeks before I get to make another video. So I thought, what better pen to talk about than this, with the all-important steel Ultra Flex nib. It's just a no-brainer. So, as always, let's just get into the pen itself before I give some of my views and do a writing sample. And as you can see, this is in this nice glacier color, which I really do enjoy. Then we have the top finial here, which is in the same acrylic as the rest of the pen. And you have this thin ring here, which is, the clip is connected to, and this clip has a teardrop shape, which is quite reminiscent of the Conklin Durograph. Except this one is a whole lot more flexible. In fact, it's so flexible that sometimes I'm afraid it will break, but I've owned this pen for 7 months and it hasn't broken yet, so maybe I'm just, paranoid. Then we have the cap itself and the cap ring, which is engraved with the letters FPR. Obviously, this is laser engraved, but it's kind of it's not the best job I've ever seen, and I will talk about this later in the opinion part of this video. And then we have the barrel with a black plastic ring and the blind cap, also the end finial, which is in the same material as the rest of the pen. And the blind cap comes off to reveal this piston knob here, which is in plastic. In fact, the entire piston mechanism is plastic, and really the entire pen is in plastic, besides the cap ring, the clip, and the nib itself. And one more thing I wanted to mention, you can see this particular color is slightly transparent, right? There is a bit of transparency to it, and you can see, if you look really carefully, you can see the threads through that color, and you can see the ink sloshing around, which is kind of nice. But this one is a feature of this model in particular because, for example, this red one, it is slightly translucent, but you can't really see through it. So now let's take the cap off, and this comes off in, I think, about 1.5 rotations, and you can see there is an ink window, which is helpful in other models, but on this one it's not so necessary because you can kind of just see through the acrylic regardless. But it is really clear, and it really does give you an idea of how much ink is left inside. Then underneath that we have the threads, which are not too sharp, but you do feel them when you write, although they're not a big deal. And the section is in the same color of acrylic as the rest of the pen, which I really do enjoy. And there's no taper, but I mean, it's pretty good. It doesn't really slip, at least for me. And then here we have the Fountain Pen Revolution Ultra Flex nib. Let's get a closer look on that. So here we have the nib. You can see how long that slit is for maximum flex, as well as the cutouts on the side to really help the nib just flex that little bit more. And it's got the FPR initials as well, laser engraved onto there. And this is supposed to be an extra fine, but with how wet it is, it's more like a fine, or even a medium on some paper. So that's all I have to say in terms of how this pen looks. So it's time for my views on this pen, and there's a lot I like about it. So let's start with that, shall we? So I really love how this pen writes. It's a fantastic writer. It is very smooth, although it does have some feedback, but it is really smooth because it's a really wet pen, which is another thing I love about this pen. Obviously, it also has that amazing flex that honestly you're buying this nib for, and it's also a piston filler, which is just cool. I mean, for one thing, a piston filler is a cool gimmick to have, but it's just also required, I think, for this pen in particular because of how wet it is. Oh, I didn't mention it has an ebonite feed. Wow, how could I forget that? But yes, it has an ebonite feed, so the ink flow is insane, and it's a very thirsty pen, so you really do need a lot of capacity on it. Also, the colors are interesting, to say the least. I mean, it's pretty personal whether you like them or not. Personally, I'm not such a huge fan of how this pen looks with its colors, but I know people who really do like these colors. Some of my friends who are girls, they like how these pens look, and I can understand that. Besides this glacier color, there's also this red that I showed you guys just now. I'm not sure about other colors. There's a lot to choose from, and there's a lot of different models to choose from as well. The nice thing about FPR is that you can just put basically any nib on any of their pens, which is really nice, because then you could just get your favorite nib on your favorite pen. Also is disassemble friendly. That's a new term I just made up. And that's great because that makes the pen easy to clean, right? I have a fully disassembled one here. Here is the barrel, the piston, which you can then disassemble further and have this fully extended, and you can put on some silicone grease. You have the nib unit, the blind cap, of course, and the cap. And the cap doesn't have any cap liners, so basically, this entire pen is extremely easy to clean, and I love that. So, the last thing I like about this pen is the fact that it is relatively inexpensive. Usually, this pen is $60 on FPR's website, although it's like basically always on sale. So, right now, it's 47 bucks. But when I bought this pen, I think it was original price, or it was like something like 50 something dollars, but it was buy one get one free, so that's actually how I got this other pen here, so that was good. Also, if you spend more than 60 bucks, you get a free pen. This is called the Muft, and it's an eyedropper pen with a steel nib. It's nothing crazy, but it is a nice thing that they give you, and I think it's kind of cute that they give you this pen. It does have what I think might be an ebonite feed. I'm not sure, it just looks like ebonite to me. It might be plastic, so don't quote me on that. So that's all I like about this pen. Let's get into the stuff I don't like about this pen. Ink leaks into the cap, and that's a very common issue. It happens on both of my pens, and I think it's just because of how wet this pen is, and it's got the ebonite feed, so the ink from that feed kind of splashes into the pen when it, there's like sudden movements or like pressure changes. And it is kind of annoying because if ink gets into the cap, it basically means it gets onto the section and the threads as well, because you can see how deep those things are into the cap. And that results in inky fingers, which is not ideal. And, I mean, that's just a bummer, I guess. I don't think this pen is such a good pen for traveling with, because, any sudden movements like shaking on a bus or pressure changes on a plane is going to cause a lot of leakage into the cap, and it's going to be a hassle to clean out or to write with after that. Also, it's got a pretty cheap build, but I can't critique too much because it doesn't cost that much. It's pretty cheap. It's built solid, right? Nothing really rattles, but you just feel that it's really cheap plastic and it's really light, and you can see all the metal components are super thin as well. And just looking at this pen doesn't give off the impression that it's anything beyond its price tag, which, I mean, it doesn't have to be. I'm just saying that it doesn't look too refined is what I'm going to put it as, especially with that lasering job on the cap band there. It's really not too all-inspiring when it comes to build quality. But, I mean, you're paying 50 bucks, 60 bucks, right? So you shouldn't be expecting that much quality. But that's just something you might want to keep in mind. Then the last thing I have to say is that this pen can get too wet sometimes, depending on what ink you're using. Again, depending on what ink you're using, sometimes this pen can basically feather or bleed through Clairefontaine, which is just crazy, right? It bleeds through Rhodia on a pretty consistent basis when you flex it, but it can bleed through Clairefontaine, which is something I never thought a pen could do, but this one manages to do it. So, that's about it. I know what you really want to see. Let's get into the writing sample. Okay, here we have the fountain pen Revolution Jaipur version 2. This has an extra fine steel ultra flex nib. And the ink is Diamine Arctic Blue. This one has quite a bit of shimmer to it, although I'm not sure how that shows up on the camera or, well, the phone. Anyway, let's do something special with this. So it's just a brilliant writer, and as you can see, I mean, it's got amazing flex, and it's really smooth too. And I mean, if you took it slow, you could push it quite hard, and you can get, okay, I was gonna say you can get quite a lot of flex without railroading, but it just railroaded. Although I haven't primed the feed or anything, I just took it right out and filled it up, and I started writing with it. So if you took it slow and you were careful, this pen, I feel, has some of the best flex that I've honestly ever experienced. And as for line variation, I mean, you're not really going to be using this as a workhorse pen, or at least I hope you don't, but, you know, if you don't put any pressure, it's pretty consistent, and faster writing is also pretty good without any pressure. It's just an all-around pretty great pen, besides the fact that traveling with it is gonna be a pain in the bum. But otherwise, I love this pen, and can't wait to use fountain pens again in another 3 weeks.